Pat's Pizza and Bistro, 1426 West Broad Street, Bethlehem, PA. One of my favorite places to go in the Valley, and they came on as a sponsor. Yanni's been on the podcast before. He's had me up there from tastings. I've had everything from the chicken fingers, which are made from scratch, all the way up to the brand new pasta flights. The pasta flights are trending. They are flying off the shelves. It's insane that they can even keep up. I met the chef over there. Legit, no joke stuff going on. They use clean ingredients, real food, fresh food. It is family owned, family operated. It is very fast and furious. If you go to their online website, it is right here. You can get all this information. You can order there. You can place pickup orders. You can have delivery on certain days, and the hours of operation are on there as well. Please go check them out. I am not just saying this. They are a legit force to be reckoned with in the Valley. That's Pat's Pizza and Bistro, 1426 West Broad Street, Bethlehem, PA. Luke Delmeyer knives, handcrafted, handmade knives. I use mine every time we go to the pop-ups, and it is ridiculous. It is just something special. There's something different. It's handcrafted. It's handmade. Luke has grown since we started the show to now, where he is pumping out knives and classes. I want to push his classes. If you go to lukedelmeyer.com, it has all the information for the classes, and you get to take a 2-day course, and you go over everything from safety on how to use it. You're selecting the knife handles out, and you're really from top to bottom getting to go through the whole experience. Where else can you find that in the Valley? Luke is a very special person to the show. He's really cool. We've done projects together. We have apparel we're doing together. I really want you to go check it out. If you're interested in anything, handcrafted stuff, working class stuff, blue collar stuff, like this is the area you need to go to. But it's lukedelmeyer.com, Luke Delmeyer, handcrafted knives. Sign up for those classes, those courses. Go check that out. It's really cool. It's a 2-day event, and you get to experience making your own knife, and then you take your knife home with you. And you're going to take home a little bit more than that. So check out Luke Delmeyer, friend of the show. Always awesome watching him grow. LukeDelmeyer.com. MindleafCBD.com. Mindleaf. Easton Zone, Mindleaf CBD. I didn't know a lot about CBD till they became a sponsor and they started coming on the show a lot. And Liz is huge for, I learn something every time she comes on. They are over in College Hill in Easton. You can check out all their information on mindleafcbd.com. I believe you can order there, but go experience the store. Liz's mom works over there. Liz keeps bringing in products such as the honey flights. They have peanut butter, the infused pretzels. My favorite thing is the tinctures to go to sleep. I have problems sleeping, and these things put me out, and I have a little bit of lucid dreams riding a unicorn, and then I wake up back to normal, and then I get excited to do that again. So my big thing I use with them is the tinctures and the balm. The balm is another one. I use it for aches and pains on my knees, and my old man uses it for his arthritis. Mindleaf CBD. They are over in Easton on College Hill. Please go check the store out. Really cool space, and like I said, Liz's mom's over there, and they will help you with everything. It's awesome that they're super local, and I stand behind their CBD and everything that they got coming out of there. That's Mindleaf CBD, mindleafcbd.com. Eric K. Dowdle, defense attorney. We had him on the show, and what crazy stories this guy's had. He's helped a ton of people over the years, and if you're looking for help, he is your guy. You can contact them at 610-882-3000, and it's ekdefense.com. Do you have a pending court case? Do you have a court appearance and need a defense lawyer? Do you need proper representation? Felony, misdemeanor, drug offense, assault, homicide, DUI, traffic violation, appeals. Reach out to Eric. Check out the podcast we did with him as well. It has his whole story on there. If you need help, Eric is here to help you. He sponsors the show. We appreciate it. He's going to be doing a monthly thing with us. Eric will be a part of the family now. Thank you for sponsoring.
Start ready when you are.
Cool. Never Again Radio. I have no clue what episode this is because we're actually ahead. Welcome to Never Again Studio, man. How are you?
Thanks very much. I'm very good.
I got introduced to your product through Tim a couple years ago, and then I've always been in the cooking world and cast iron, and it was always a thing. And then sometimes I understood it, and sometimes I didn't. And then we finally got connected. And then when you took me on the tour, I'm just overly impressed and super want to dive into this for my own education, but I just think it's going to be a dope podcast to do.
Thank you.
How did you get into wanting to even do cast iron? I feel like it's an odd thing for people to get into, to cook in, let alone to make your own cast iron.
Yeah, sure.
It's such a cool, unique thing that you got into.
Yeah, thanks. So I started the company in 2015, and it starts with me cooking with cast iron. I mean, I'm definitely not the first, we're roughly of the same generation, and there's people our age that are getting back into this. It was sort of lost for a generation.
Yeah.
And there was this renewed interest, I'd say starts maybe, let's say 10 years ago, that people are starting to recommend cast iron to each other. And there's a cookbook author that I love who is always shouting out cast iron, saying, hey, make sure you use cast iron when you make that. And I was like, well, I guess I got to see what all the fuss is about. So that was probably 2013, 2014. And at the time, everyone, the just standard recommendation on cast iron was you got to get the vintage ones. Like they don't make them like they used to, and that the old ones are smoother and lighter and this and that. So I went and I got a vintage skillet on eBay or Craigslist or whatever and cleaned it up and just fell in love with it. That was 2013. And then I went down the rabbit hole and I started buying up all these vintage pans at the time. So I converted my garage to a cast iron restoration facility where I had,
at this point, were you ordering them and then having to clean them up because they were just, you're not going to get them in pristine stuff.
Exactly.
Because I remember when I started getting into some of the collection you have in your office, I was like, dude, it's so crazy because it was triggering. This is what my grandparents cooked on. And then this was early on where all my parents' pots and pans, and that was on the bottom because it was the heaviest, but I never understood what cast iron was.
Right.
So then to get those back, you obviously have to clean stuff off.
Yeah.
So you're kind of have this it's cool to kind of see where it starts as the hobby, because that's usually where it starts with the love of something, where it's you're cleaning it up, you're out in the garage, it's your away time now, and you're just kind of cleaning up these cast irons.
Right. So for context, American cast iron has its heyday from the 1890s through the 1950s. And that's the time when cast iron is just the standard cookware material. And if someone has a skillet, it's a cast iron skillet. That's just what everyone had at the time. And this is in the time when people would have had the old wood burning stoves. And the story that, as I've heard it told, I'm not a historian, but that World War II is this turning point where all these factories during World War II, a lot of factories, come up producing metals for the war effort. And you have places that are making, aluminum and stainless steel and these different materials, all related to whatever, for planes and tanks and whatever the hell else they need at the time. And then after the war, these companies are looking for something to do. And in the 50s, after the war, a lot of these factories start making cookware, and that's when you have the new versions of cookware. That's where you start to see coated aluminum, which has become a real standard for people in our generation. And you start to see clad stainless cookware, if you're familiar with brands like All Clad, or pretty much anytime you buy a stainless steel piece of cookware, it's actually clad. There's actually some aluminum or copper or some other material in there. Anyway, all that comes in the 50s and basically kills off cast iron. So all the cast iron brands that people were really excited about start to go under in the 50s. And then 60s, 70s, 80s, you're just in this time where people aren't cooking with cast iron. It's fallen out of favor. And like I said, maybe 10 years ago, through a combination of different things, I think it has to do with people getting more interested in where their food comes from.
Yeah.
And then it's also maybe it's pushed back to the digital age when people want something old school and they want to have more of a connection to...
Very similar with what was going on or still is going on with vinyl.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly like that. So I think that's part of the renewed interest in it. And I was part of that too. I started getting excited about it from a historical perspective, but also, I kept seeing it in this cookbook and I was like, let's see what all the fuss is about. And as soon as I cooked on it, I was like, oh, it's different.
Yeah.
It's not just a different size pan or whatever. We all have cookware collections with all different shapes and sizes, but I was like, cooking on cast iron just has a different effect on the food. And it comes out in a way that's better for certain things. It's not the right tool for every job, But I was like, the thing that it does it best. It does it better than anything else does that. And I was hooked. So, yeah, eventually that led to starting the company. I mean, like I said, I got really into the vintage stuff. And at the time, there were only like 2 modern options on the market that are really worth talking about. There was a low end option, and it's the one that everyone is familiar with. And it's like a $20 whatever skillet you find at Target, Walmart, and everywhere. And then there's this super high end stuff that was like $160, $170. And I thought both of those options were ridiculous, and I thought I could design a better one.
That's awesome. I love, because there's so much to pick through to even get to the point where you thought that you could design something in between it. I love hearing stories where like there isn't an option that you want, and then you're like,
that's exactly what this is. So I'm like, I know in my head what a skillet is supposed to be as I imagine skillets. So I'm like, I bet I could figure out how to make one. And it's also worth saying that I came from a background in design, and this wasn't like a total leap. Like I had done other design work. I was an art major in school.
You can take a specific skill set that you had and apply it to getting the job done, and being like, oh, like I can use this that I have from this other place, and I could. That's, I think, is the fun part, when you realize like, oh wait, I can get this done. Like this isn't just an idea where like I'm having a bunch of beers with buddies and they're like, dude, you're crazy. It's like, I'm like, oh, I can make this happen because I have this, and that from a previous job.
Yeah. And it's probably too, it's like that certain amount of arrogance that I'm sure every entrepreneur has, that you're like, I can figure this. Like,
you have to.
If someone else can do it, I can totally do it.
Yeah.
And there's probably, some amount of delusion in there, but you figure it out. So I'll also say, just as background, that I have a family history in the housewares industry. So a few years before I started Stargazer, well, actually, if we go way back, my grandfather started a tabletop company, a dinnerware company, making ceramics and glass. And they were mostly manufactured in Europe at the time. It was a lot of stuff from Portugal. But that was my introduction to it. Was I started working for that company maybe 3 or 4 years pre-Stargazer. I was doing some design work for them, and some product development, and some, I just got this like crash course in seeing how the things are made, how the housewares market works, and how, retail and wholesale, and just a rundown of.
Did you like that when you were doing it?
I liked a lot of it. And I got really excited about, I would say generally I liked it, but at the same time, there were things with Stargazer that I was like, whatever, if this were my company, here's what I would do. One of those things was like being American made. That was that thing that, we weren't American manufacturing. And I started at the same time I was getting excited about cast iron. I was getting excited about just made in America and the sort of possibilities of making stuff here, which, ever since, let's say, the 80s, that's been American manufacturing had been getting phased out.
Yeah.
And I thought it'd be exciting to make products here. And that was part of what I wanted to do, is like take a lot of the stuff I loved about that job, but cast iron, which I was excited about, and what if we could make it all here? That was part of like the original goal, was 100% domestic supply chain. And that was a lot of the startup work was sourcing everything here, because it has to be manufactured across multiple locations, and just sorting out the supply chain.
Before we get too far along, I just want to get back to when you were originally doing it. What were you cooking on them? Like, was there a go-to thing that you were cooking? Were you doing breakfast? What was like the main, because I mean, every time you're doing it, you're obviously cooking on these things a lot. What was like kind of the first things that you were cooking on? Or cooking with, I'm sorry.
Well, I'll say I'm definitely not a chef. Like, people come to me and they assume that I'm some like expert cook because I own a cookware company, and I get it. But I'm like, I come at this much more as someone who appreciates good engineering and well-made tools and that type of thing, more than like, oh, I was a cook and I didn't have the whatever.
Yeah.
Having said that, I think anything that needs to be browned, like anything that benefits from a crust, like, skillet cornbread is like, that's its own thing. And I definitely got into that. And then I'm a vegetarian, so I wasn't making meat on it, but a lot of people like the way that it sears a piece of meat.
Yeah.
For me, I find it browns Brussels sprouts as well as it does a piece of meat. And really anything that benefits from the sear and the browning and the heat retention is what I was getting into.
No, that's cool. because I saw in the social media now is like you see a lot of people sharing their recipes, and like every day I'm on the Stargazer social media, I'm like, oh, you could do a pizza. Oh, you could do vegetables. Oh, and then you just start seeing this endless rabbit hole of things that you could see. So it's cool that, you know, I like that it wasn't from a chef angle and it is from an engineer angle. It's a whole different story. That's not common for someone to kind of like, you know, some people be like, yeah, it was food thing. And then now it's this, where it's like, no, I can make a better product. And why isn't this product in this range that I want it? And then now you're kind of like seeing the forming of the business.
Yeah.
So when you start looking for the manufacturing and like where the hell you're going to get all the products from, where do you even start? Because if you were even in the other business and that wasn't American made, it probably was not easy to start getting into how do I make this thing American? I mean, like, and even like the early prototypes to get all the supplies, like where do you even know to start to do that?
Well, the first step, I did basically a rough draft of the first design, which is a CAD model of what I thought a skillet should look like. And I made some changes to the handle and made some other, you know, just to version 1 where I was like, this is my first pass at it. And I just started sending it around. I'd send it to a foundry and I'd set up a call with them and be like, what, you know, can you do this? For how much, obviously. And also like,
yeah, because you're getting one-offs at that point, right?
yeah. And also like, does my design even make sense? Like, is this even a castable thing? And at the time I didn't know anything about, you know, draft angles and parting lines and all these like engineering considerations that are casting specific. Like I knew generally about ceramics and glass and certain things, but cast iron is its own beast and it has its own just specific requirements. And I had to really learn that and sort of retool the design many times, both to make it more manufacturable, but also just like refining it along the way. So I'd say it happened. There was probably a 6-month window where I'm back and forth with foundries, figuring out.
And then you got to find the right foundry that's going to be like, hey, and they're going to answer their questions and have like, they're into your project and then like help you kind of bring it along.
Yeah. And you find,
because some people be like, yeah, I don't got time for this stuff, man. Like, I can't do this. But then if you find the right person to be like, yeah, you need to do this and this, and then now you're learning, and then like that's a fun part of the early stages of business, or just the early stages of the product where you're like, you're kind of growing the baby and you're like, oh, all right. Like, and then you start to, then I think that's where the addiction kind of starts to set in, where you're like, oh no, this is doable. I just need more information. The information's out there. If I get the information, this whole thing will work. And then it's just boom. And then it's, you're in the hole.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where you find 100 ways that don't work, but you're like, but now I know that these 100 ways don't work. And it's just, it's going on the list. I mean, fortunately with foundry, well, fortunately, or unfortunately, there aren't that many foundries. Like, you know, it's not, you know, let's say there's
3 to call.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, maybe I've probably in the last 5 years, I've talked to maybe 100 different foundries.
Yeah.
And you find probably 80% of them are like, this is just not, like, just don't even touch it. There's another 10% that are like, yeah, maybe with some changes. And then there's 10% in there that they're like, actually, this is something that's kind of in our lane. And if you made these or that changes and you start to figure it out with those. And we ended up going into production. I've done production runs at maybe 3 different foundries at this point. And like I said, that's just one of the, like we have at this point 4 different manufacturing locations that I'm kind of coordinating between, and the foundry is just one of those.
That was one of the interesting parts of when you were doing the tour, and then it was like I didn't, you know, realize that like stuff was going out and then coming in, and then like the inspections, and then where everything has to go with everything. Like there's way more into it where I was just like, holy shit, there's a lot of stuff that's got to kind of go around and the moving parts. What was that like for you to set those up, and like how long did it take before, like, you know, when you got the first prototype back, and like how many trial and errors until you had something similar to that where you can at least do the first run and then even try and sell them?
Yeah, well, the difficult thing with prototypes with cast iron, I mean, there are a couple ways to do it as far as if you want to just get one skillet and like check it, but it's not cost effective at all. The best option right now, which is what I did originally, would be to 3D print one.
Yeah.
And then you see, is the size and shape correct? You're not going to get a sense of weight, but dimensionally it's the same.
Yeah.
And that's been so helpful that I committed and I got a 3D printer on my desk, and we can just run samples now where I'm like, hey, what does this handle feel like in my hand? Okay, well, a couple hours later, I have the handle in my hand, and it's incredible.
Yeah, it's cool. A buddy of mine got one of those for like developing the same thing where he makes tattoo machines, and then to get the just like the prototypes down,
Yeah.
and you're not wasting material, you're not wasting hours out in the shop. You can really design it. And then like when he started just making me like this phone case and other stuff, you start realizing like what that tool originally was when they talked about 3D printing to like what it can actually do now, where it's like I didn't even think of that, where you can totally develop things out of that. And then, you know, like you said, the weight and everything, but at least you can get the dimensions, and you're not having to bother somebody to make it and wait on, like, you know, because like how long did it take when you got your first prototype of just one thing done when you had like the first one made?
Well, that's the longest part of the development process is building the tooling. So I'll give a quick, I think this will make more sense when I explain how cast iron is made. Everyone, in a lot of, the way a lot of things are manufactured is with a mold, where you have, let's say you're molding plastics. You have a mold that's made out of metal, and you put molten plastic into that mold, and it takes on the shape of the inside of that mold, and then you open the mold and you release the piece inside. The thing with cast iron is it's so freaking hot. So they pour this iron at like 2,700, 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit, which is it destroys whatever you pour it into, basically. So if you had a mold made out of metal and you pour molten iron into it, you've just destroyed that mold. So the way that we do it, and the way that it's done historically, like even going back to late 1800s, is called green sand casting, where you take a mixture of wet sand and clay, and you pack it together, and then you take what's called the master pattern, which is basically the shape of the skillet mounted to a plate, and you stamp it in, and you leave a cavity in the sand that's the shape of your skillet. So if you think of the way I was explaining it to people, is like you're building a sandcastle, and you put the wet sand into the plastic, and then it releases from the mold, and it holds its shape because it's wet and it's packed in. It's the same idea, that you're holding that shape of the cavity in the sand, and then you're pouring molten iron into the sand, and of course, like I said, it's destructive. So every mold is single use. That iron cools in the sand, and then you shake the sand off, and that's it. That's the thing that's left. So you're constantly remaking your molds out of sand every time you pour from that master pattern. So to build the master pattern, that's the tooling. That's the thing that we're building, and that's the template for all the pieces, and that takes months. They take a solid slab of metal, it's either aluminum or iron, and CNC machine your shape into that slab. And yeah, so you send off your final design. Everyone says, yes, we're happy with this. This is good. And you approve everything. And then you're waiting, probably 3 months before you actually have a casting in your hand. And then there's all the other parts of the supply chain to work out, like the machining and all the surface finishing and all that other stuff too. But that's the longest waiting time though. And that's the time that you're like, the design is done and you're all excited about it, and you want the thing in your hand, and then you just got to sit and wait. And then it usually takes a couple months, multiple iterations from that point. You see the first castings and you realize, you know what, just translating it from the 3D print to the iron, something's a little funny here. We got to go back and we got to tweak that pattern. We got to run another round of samples, and there's usually a few months of back and forth on that. So yeah, and then like I said, trial and error with the other steps of the supply chain, which whenever you want to get into. But that initial tooling, that was the big investment. So we had done the 3D prints in early 2016, and then we were in production that summer once the tooling had been built, and those patterns are thousands of dollars. I mean, anywhere from like, I don't know, $5,000 to $20,000 or whatever. That's your big investment in a new product. And everything else can be done more on the fly, like the machining and everything like that.
Yeah. So when you were waiting for the first one to be developed, that you kind of knew that you had something there, what were you doing in between that time when you were waiting? Because you were kind of just, your hands are tied. Are you developing the other end of the business? Are you looking for a warehouse space? Are you looking to kind of set the whole thing up? Like when you were kind of waiting for the first prototype to come back, where you knew like, hey, this is the pan, what was your business that you were doing in between there? Were you still working at the time? Were you developing marketing? Like what were you really doing with that time?
No, so there was a period of time where I quit my full-time job. Like when I started getting to those conversations with the foundries started taking shape, where I found there are a few foundries telling me, hey, we can probably do this. It was just that leap of faith thing where I quit my job and I was like, I'll I'll figure it out. It looks like this is happening and I'll figure it out.
It's the scariest part to do, and I'd like to focus on it a little bit.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
that jump, and I tell people when I did it, it was not easy to do. It took a couple years till I was in a position that I just was like, this is the time, and I did it, and I didn't look back, but the time that I needed while I was spending at work is what I needed to finish the things that weren't able to make it a business because I was working.
Yeah. And, I was very lucky that I had I had a little bit of wiggle room there that I could afford to take a little bit of time off. And I also thought I was just ready for a change. And I was like, if this doesn't work out, I'll figure something else out. And my girlfriend was on board. And she was like,
that always helps.
If I have to pay the rent, I'll pay the rent. And,
yeah.
And I'm like, well, we just decided together.
The support's huge,
we'll
too.
We'll figure it out. Yeah, absolutely. And, and she had the confidence. She reinforced my enthusiasm for it to tell me, she's like, you're smart. You'll figure it out and we'll figure something else out. And so I quit my job and I was working on this full time for probably a few months before it was even.
Was this still in the garage or shed?
This is like pre-production.
Yeah.
This is just like working from home and doing the design stuff. And then once I pulled the trigger, which is like late 2015, there's this period of a few months when it's like, this is definitely happening. And I've filed all the paperwork and we're doing it. We started thinking, it wasn't even until then that I was like, how are we going to sell this thing? Like the marketing and all that stuff that's so many things down the list of what's even on my radar. Cause I was excited about the design and the manufacturing and the making the thing that we're like, hey, should we be like, I don't know, we decided to do a Kickstarter campaign, but that wasn't even until later. So so to answer your question about what did we do while we were waiting, the Kickstarter campaign was one of them. And that was February of 2016. And we were like, well, we'll throw it up there and we'll just see what happens. And I shot the video myself and I, frankly kind of half-assed it. If I had known how much potential was there, like I wasn't a user of Kickstarter. I didn't think that much about it. And we set a funding goal of 10 grand. And I was like, if we make 10 grand, that'd be awesome. And we passed that goal with under 2 days. Like, it was just like,
that's so crazy.
It immediately,
that's gotta be fuel though for you to be like, I mean, you have your girlfriend supporting you and you believe in the project, and then, let's just throw out Kickstarter, and then bam, you get the money. You're probably like, we should have put it out further.
I know. I was like, if I had known, I would have hired a video crew or something. I don't know. But
well, sometimes having it on the end that you did it probably makes it more of like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, this is an underground project. We're working on it. Sometimes that does give the feel of like, this is real. It's not Hollywood
and that's also
stuff.
That's totally that's how I would do it. I mean, that's generally, it's rare that I'm like, hey, we better bring in a professional for this. It's generally like, hey, it's something we should do. And it's like, okay, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And that's what we did with Kickstarter. And like I said, we had this
I forgot about Kickstarter. That's probably helped so many businesses out.
I mean, at the time, I haven't been active on there, but I couldn't believe how quickly it took off. And it's not only the traction that we got on Kickstarter, it's like the people that had found it on Kickstarter are going and they're talking about it in the cast iron Facebook groups and the whatever. And you just it caught on so fast because I think there were people that were in the same position as me. They had seen the options on the market. They were excited about the vintage stuff, and the market was just ready for something like this. They were excited about what we were doing. And the word got out really quickly. And that period of time is so exciting. Like that February 2016, I turned 30 that month and I just started the business and it was taken off on Kickstarter, and it was like, oh, this is happening. And that's when it starts to feel real. And when you're like, oh, I might be able to actually do this for a living and because up until then it's a crazy idea. And I had people, I told a couple people, like friends and family and stuff, I'm like, I'm starting a cookware company. And they're like, what, like cook, like what? And they don't even, I think we originally planned to do, so the first production run, I was going to invest in this tooling, build that master pattern. And we were planning on casting 150 skillets, which was like, that's a low number. Like foundries barely want to talk to you at 150 skillets. And I'm like, all right, we got to take the leap of faith. We're going to invest in 150 skillets. And I had people telling me, I had at least two people tell me, like, what are you going to do with all those extra skillets? Basically, like, let's say you can sell 50, and then what do you do with the extra? And I'm like, the extra? I think this is, I believed in it, but
Yeah.
And then Kickstarter happened, and I think we ended up selling like, I don't know, maybe 700-800 skillets on Kickstarter alone.
That's crazy.
Just through that campaign.
Yeah, what was the campaign? Is that you basically believed in the project and that you would order a cast iron skillet before you had it up and going?
Yeah, so it was like people could back the campaign, and I told everyone in the campaign, I was like, we're already building the tooling, but the product doesn't exist yet. And if you believe in what we're doing, we gave them, some discount or whatever other incentives to get in on the ground floor. And and a bunch of people did. And at the time, it was just the skillet in one size.
You were shooting for 150 and in 2 days sold 800.
Yeah, well, 2 days until we hit our funding goal, that 10,000 goal. And then we ended up selling, like I said, 700 or 800, and all in, it was like 50-something thousand, which covered the tooling on the first production run and whatever other small startup costs, enough that that's when I started setting up the garage, and everything was all like ramping up to that summer where
that must have been a fun summer, man.
Yeah, I look back on it, like I romanticize it now in hindsight, where I'm like, oh, it's the garage days. Like I worked my ass off. Like that was brutal.
Yeah.
I've never worked that hard in my life with like trying to maintain. It was just, so I was the only employee of the company. So that 150 skillets like immediately became not enough. We were like, oh, we're going to go in with 150. And I was like, now we're already back ordered another however many hundreds of skillets. So I contacted the foundry, and I'm like, you better make that first production run 250 instead of 150. And then we'll go from there.
And then they were probably like, all right, like they're more excited to be doing more than just the 150.
So we did the 250. So I told them, increase that to 250. And then here's another order for another 500 immediately after. And that 250, I was like, we'll just do it in the garage. Which is already insane. Like even the level of like just the amount of equipment that I would have needed to do it right is like, you can't really put that in a garage. But I was like, we'll figure it out.
Yeah. But that's what you said when you romanticize about it, is like, that's when you don't know what you're doing, and you'll take on anything and you'll sacrifice anything and you will get it done. Yeah. And I think that is such a huge part of how you succeed later, is because you don't have to take the wild risk and be like, well, I'm just going to do this all summer. Now you're like, all right, cool. Like we know we can get it done. And then now you have belief in getting it done. And now you work smarter, not harder. And I think you have to go through that terrible, not even terrible. It's that Wild West mentality of where you're just like, well, whatever, this is what we'll do. I remember down here, it's like, I'm working 2 jobs and then coming down here and doing a podcast at night, getting 4 hours of sleep. And it's like, I don't work like that anymore. But I don't work like that anymore. It was because I failed 1 million times, and now I know what I'm doing, and I don't have to work like that.
Right.
Like now, like when I was even telling you, it's like I schedule the podcast between 10 and 3. And if they can fit in that window, I'm like in the hours of a regular job now. But it was not overnight that I had to do that.
Yeah, like you've bought yourself that luxury, right? With the investment.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. And I'm sure you did. Like I decided early on. So in that first summer of production, I was like, I'm not going to be the thing that holds this company back. And whatever Stargazer, the company's called Stargazer, by the way. I don't even think I said that.
No, you did earlier.
Oh, okay.
I want to get back to where because we'll transition off of this then and get into like how you wanted to name it and brand it.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, we can talk about that too. But I was like, I was like, whatever Stargazer needs from me, I'm putting my full self on the line here.
Yeah.
And I remember that summer doing the math of like, I need this many hours to eat and this many hours to sleep.
Yeah. And
then I'm going to produce skillets. Like I'm going to do this. Yeah. And I was like, if I wake up,
that's the stuff nobody sees.
I know. And I was like, if I wake up at the crack of dawn. Oh, that was the other thing, was like daylight hours. Like I was in the garage and the lighting wasn't great too. So I was like, I got to optimize daylight hours.
Yeah.
And I am not a morning person, but I was like, I'm going to get up at sunrise and make sure that I am producing skillets as much as I can in the daylight hours, so that in the dark hours, I can be doing the other shit that I had to do and taking and at the time, at the end of every production day, I'd be grinding them and doing the dirty work in the garage. I'd be boxing them up on my dining room floor. Like I cleared out the garage, the dining room, And so the dining room was like the packaging, the clean area. Oh, and my kitchen. I was seasoning them all in the kitchen. So
It's crazy how like the space just takes over, and then you like that's your first. It's your first. It's your first infrastructure.
Yeah.
Like we started this in my living room in my apartment, and it was no longer my apartment.
Exactly.
The living room was now the podcast studio.
Yeah.
And then like you would now have all this stuff. And then it got to a point where I was like, all right, what do I pay a month here? I could take that money and we can get into a studio. And then this is way easier because my living stuff is not inside here. And then that's when I never stopped after that. Like,
Yeah.
but when it's funny because like if you want it, you stop looking at your apartment as your apartment. This is now the office.
Yeah.
This is now the workspace. This is now we're doing it here. And then it never stays there because you can't run a cast iron skillet thing out of a shed and an
totally.
apartment, especially on the scale that you're at now.
Yeah.
But it has to start somewhere.
and it's that thing. It's the same thing as like whatever Stargazer needs from me is going to be the thing. And like,
Yeah.
Stargazer needed my dining room.
Yep.
And so I cleared the goddamn dining room.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I was still, I'm remembering this as I'm talking about it. Like we'd box them up on the dining room floor. We didn't even have a pickup at the time. Like I would take all those boxes, load them up into my car, and drive them personally to FedEx. Yeah, and it was just like, it was every waking hour for those few months.
Yeah.
And that was just like, that was the grind, and I had to like. At that point, it was even past like proof of concept and whatever, because we had already had the Kickstarter attention, and we were starting to get interest, and the orders kept coming in after Kickstarter just because we had some momentum from that. And it was like, we got to get this first production run. Like I didn't have, part of it was just time too, that you're like, I'm just going to go all in and just bang this thing out, and then we'll figure it out from there. And as soon as we were even halfway set up in the garage, I was like, we're going to have to scale up like now.
Yeah.
So I did those 250. Those first, like I said, I increased that first run 150 to 250. I shipped 250 skillets processed in that garage, seasoned in my home oven, which
Yeah,
I could
because
only.
now being walked through the steps of doing this, now I'm like, oh, he had to do all this tumbling and all the different things that you were doing with like the guys that you have like cleaning the edges and all that. So that you basically created all those jobs by doing those in the shed.
Yeah, so I learned, and some of those steps are added over time too.
Yeah.
Like we do like a very specific surface finish treatment now that I wasn't doing at the time, but we got feedback from our early customers of like, hey, it's really non-stick, but that the seasoning, they were having some trouble with the seasoning. And so we went back and we kind of retooled our surface finishing, and you're seeing, 2-3 years of trial and error materialized in our current production facility. So all of those things weren't in the garage, but definitely all of the grinding, all those hand steps, and then all the seasoning stuff, all that had to happen. So yeah, a lot of it was there, and I had to figure out how to do it with a one-man operation and to get it done as quickly as possible, because we were already late and already hundreds of orders back ordered. And it was just, it was the grind. It was a scramble for that summer. It was brutal, but like super exciting.
Were you eating?
I was eating not enough. I see pictures of myself in the time too, and like my beard is like, I have a really bushy beard. I'm like, I don't think I stopped to shave or.
There's
like,
an awesome picture of you in the office where you're in the shed, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah. Standing at the grinder that I had like stacked on top of cardboard boxes, where I'm just like, I didn't, we didn't have like work tables or anything, where I'm just like stacking whatever. But yeah, it was exciting. And then we went from there. When it was clear, I was like, this is not, like, we can't do this for any period of time in this garage.
We're done.
Yeah. We found a small warehouse that, I don't remember what the square footage was, but it was basically like a big garage. I mean, it wasn't that much bigger. I hired the first couple people there and started training other people how to do the grinding stuff, the stuff that I'd figured out in the garage.
To free up more time.
Yeah, and then that place, I mean, we pretty much immediately upgraded that place too. That second place we were in for maybe 3 or 4 months. And I was like, we need somewhere that we can like...
How was the landlord? Did he help you find a bigger spot, or was it just a month to month at the time?
At the time, I think it was either a short-term lease or a month to month, and I can't remember. But I think going into it, I knew that I was like, even this isn't going to be big enough. So we signed the lease at that place. I moved everything in. And then I was already looking around at bigger facilities. And we were also finalizing the other detail here, which is crazy, is we were figuring out where we were going to live and where we were going to put the business. So I didn't set this up, but I grew up in Connecticut. I went to school at Lafayette, and that was how I first came to the Valley with that. And then I was living out in Wisconsin. My girlfriend was in school in Wisconsin, and we were there for 3 or 4 years. And that's where the garage was.
Oh,
so
that's crazy.
I started the company, in Madison, Wisconsin. That was the 1-car garage there. And then we knew, we were both from the East Coast. We knew we were coming back at some point, and I knew that the business needed to have a more permanent home too. And I was trying to find a warehouse and trying to find a place to live in a place that made sense for the business and for us personally and for all these things. And trying to line all that shit up was just impossible. So we got to the point where I found this short-term lease on that first small warehouse. It was in New Jersey, in the Cherry Hill area. And I was like, I loaded up all the business stuff from the garage into a U-Haul. I drove it to New Jersey, and I got everything set up there. And I think, did I hire the first couple people there? But anyway, I had to fly back, load up another U-Haul with all of our other shit.
Yeah. Now your business is taken care of. Now you have to do the home.
And move that back. And then, so while that was going on, and while I was looking for a bigger warehouse, my girlfriend's looking at apartments and stuff for where are we going to live longer term? I found a short-term lease for both. Anyway, it was a total just logistical juggling act. But anyway, so we were in New Jersey. We were in the general area, and we thought, maybe Pennsylvania, maybe New Jersey, somewhere generally around here. And we ended up coming back to the Lehigh Valley and finding a good, the right size production facility. Our place now is around 7,000 square feet.
It's an awesome facility. It's got so much cool bones to it.
It's been a good, and we had room to grow at the time. That was maybe middle of 2017 that we moved there. And we're just starting to get to the point, I feel particularly in the last year, where we're it's occasionally feeling a little crowded in here, particularly with as inventory starts to build up and stuff, where I think maybe in the next year or so, we'll be looking at some bigger spaces and maybe buying our own space and really setting it up the way I want it,
Yeah. And it's important to point out with that too. We moved the studio. It was in my apartment. Then we went to Bethlehem. Then I went to Easton. And then we had nowhere, and we were doing it at people's living rooms because we'd still had guests booked. And I remember there was a bigger guest we wanted, and she finally said yes and was in the area. And we had to do this interview. We were hunting for years out of my friend's apartment. And, when we finally landed here, this was such a development stage on it where, it's really, people just, they don't see that story you just told about driving and getting to a location and knowing it's not going to work. It's when I got here, I figured, immediately I was yeah, this isn't it. This isn't and everyone's oh, we're not moving again. And it's yeah, but it's to me, it's I know this is only going to be short term because I know what I really want to do. And then when we outgrew it down here, the move to the next spot is so important because now I know what I'm doing. So now, where you're at, where you can judge, I'm going to be out of here. What you can get into then. And that's the stuff that nobody picks through either, is that you went from the shed to the garage to the warehouse to where, now how much it can grow and where the numbers are and where it's going to be, so that now you can gauge. Because I still tell people, I'm well, this next spot might be one of the spots, but now I can open up another one of these somewhere else and maybe do it remotely. But to be able to, for me to know now that the next spot that I'm going, I'm cool, that's a 10-year. That's a 10-year palette that I can work off of. And here was 5. So I was all right, well, I don't know what's coming after that. But it's very important to pay attention to the fact that you learn where your business is going to grow, if you need your business to grow, and you need space for your business to grow even further. So it's my next spot is there's so much I can do there, but now it can breathe. It can push the boundaries of stuff. And if you don't know that, you can jam the whole thing up or throw a wrench in your entire process because you're not allowing your business. Oh, we need room. All right, well, we can't do anything. All right, well, now we're trying to build this thing and we're stuck inside this square that ain't going to go anywhere. And it's you need to have that attitude when you knew you were out of there in 3 months. You can't make something work that isn't going to work in the space. And it's everyone's why are you moving? This place is so dope. nope, it don't work anymore. And if I stay here, I can only do what I'm doing here. If I go to the next spot, take the risk on it, pay more money, and then it grows, now I have the option to make this even bigger or grow it out in the space that it is. But if you pigeonhole yourself in that shed, you don't go anywhere.
Yeah, and
that's
just
a lot of work figuring that all out.
Yeah.
And still finding a place to live and balancing a relationship and it's so much work. There's a lot of places where, and I'm sure it's the same for you, is where you see where people would give up. Like, this is way too much to figure out. And like how when we first met, we were both like admitting to each other we were crazy. And you're like, well, you have to be crazy to do this. And I feel like that's true.
If I had known, I mean, that's part of the delusion of starting this. You're like,
yep.
if you had known exactly what the road ahead looked like, I'm like, I don't know that I would have done this.
Yeah.
I remember now talking to another entrepreneur at the time, a like friend of a friend who had started their own business. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to do this thing. And they were like, turn the other way and run. Get out now. And I was like, no, I'm going to do it different than you. I'm going to figure it out. But it's just, you got to be.
It's funny when you have those conversations. I had a conversation with a friend and I'm downplaying it and he starts laughing and I'm like, what's up, Brian? And he goes, sounds to me like you're opening a restaurant. And I'm like, nope, it's a cafe. And he just starts laughing. He goes, sounds to me like you're opening a restaurant. And it's just like, I'm in, let's go. Like, I want it to grow bigger. I know I can attach it to this. I know I can attach it to that. And it's like, when you put in the 10, 11 years of work, I started this at 28, I'm 42, and it's just starting to get its bearings around it. But I got all that experience of failing. I got all that experience of taking risk. And now it's impossible for me to stop now. I have the knowledge of knowing where to go, how to put on the gas, where to do it, what we can do here. If you start seeing something, you fix it over here. Like, you've done it all yourself. Now I can start making a job for somebody because I created one. Like the one time I was down here and I was like, oh, I can have somebody do this eventually. And I can have somebody do this job. And I'm like, is this going to be like a business with employees? And like, to me, that's crazy. But it all started from, I don't like the way this is. I want it to be this way. Then when I learned how to make something, then I was like, cool, I can attach this to that. And it's just, it's just applying things and building that business and having a passion for it and not stopping. That's the biggest thing I tell everybody. As dumb as it sounds, you can't stop. You can't. You got to figure it out. You got to problem solve. I didn't know I was that good at problem solving. I was never told that in high school. And like now I look back and I'm just like, oof, like that was fucking crazy.
Yeah. It's a funny, like, combination of skills, because I thought about that a lot of, like, what is the, exactly what is the secret sauce for the people? Because so many startups fail, obviously. It's like those first 2 years are touch and go. And that's why banks don't want to give you a loan in those first couple of years and all this type of thing is because it's pretty probable that the business is going to collapse in that time. And I think it's some combination of things, right? It's like, it's that problem solving, it's having that, probably, I don't know, delusional optimism or whatever that thing is that keeps the energy going. Part of it is just like stress management. Like people that can have all that shit dumped on them and still keep their head on straight and not just panic and implode. Those are the type of people that are like, I see that there's 10 fires here. I got it. And you can just like manage the situation.
I feel like I got that from like working a cooking line, like working a high stress job. Like you kind of start applying different trades and things that you get into off of that. But it's true though. I mean, you got to kind of step back and like, there's a problem and you got to fix it and you're looking at it. And it's like, now it's like, I see myself making moves and then like, I'll be driving in a car and being like, oh shit. Like you're just doing this now. You're not thinking about it. You ain't asking for advice. Yeah. You're just getting stuff done. And like, when you start getting good at like getting on the phone and talking to those people that are making your product and you're talking to the foundry and they're like, I don't know. But then you got them now interested in making these cast irons and now it's a project on them. And they're excited because they're doing something different outside their lane. And then you start networking and building. And then like, you don't realize how much that is like a key to so many opportunities down the road with just treating people with respect. And like, when you figure out how to like talk to people on like a level of just talking to people and like, you can get a lot of stuff done by just treating somebody normal. Yeah. Instead of just being like, you know what I want? And like, I've worked for so many terrible people and I hated every moment of it. But now I'm like, well, I don't want to ever treat it like I know how I don't want people to feel. Mm-hmm. So you just treat people normal. And if you have that knowledge of like working those blue collar jobs or anything like that, like there's so much to the networking side where like people, like my buddy's like, dude, you don't even know what you're doing. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, you're connecting all these different people and doing all this stuff. And I'm just like, bro, I'm just doing this. And then he's like, pull yourself out and label what you're doing. And then you start looking at like, oh, I didn't go to college for any of this stuff. And this is just all learn from trial and error.
Yeah.
And you just start building yourself up. And then when you start realizing what you're doing, you're like, then you look back and you're like, what was that? Like, that was crazy to get through all that this started in an apartment. When you told me this started in a shed, it's the first thing I tell anybody because so many people hit me up and you're like, oh, what's up with that and this? I'm like, dude, this guy started this in a shed.
Yeah.
I'm like, I said, I couldn't take pictures of the facility because it was so long. Like, this is crazy. Because I remember walking through there and I was like, man, I used to be the one doing these jobs. And then I'm like, and here I am walking with this guy who went from doing that to running it. And then now I'm the guy who's like, I remember being the guy who was working and then being like, man, how do I get to be that guy? And then people don't see all the work that goes into that and the sacrifice and driving across the state and like finding a location and then knowing it's not going to work. It's super impressive what you've done.
Thank you. The other part of it too, like you're talking about, the sort of the networking and the like, the relationships that form around it. And the other thing that greases the wheels on this is scale. Like as you're putting in the time and as you're growing it for you, like as you're growing the audience, everything gets easier as you have that, like, for us, like when I'm that first production run, when I'm calling around and being like, hey, will you make 150 skillets for us? And foundries are like, get the hell out of here with 150 skillets. And I can talk to places now and be like, we're looking at 10,000 or whatever it is. And it's like, you start to have that leverage and you just are able to get
it's real
more people on the phone. Yeah. And you have other people that are interested in working with you just because you've established yourself and you've proven that you can do that thing. And it comes, there's some of it that just happens just organically from the scale, and it just becomes so much easier once that ball is rolling and you have that momentum.
And that's a nice, because I'm kind of starting to get there where like I have people reach out now and they're like, hey, we saw what you're doing. And then if somebody asks me to come on, I generally I'm like, okay, cool. Like you actually asked me. So that means that you're like confident in what you're doing. So there's usually a good show there. So like, I'm at the point now where it's like, it's kind of like, you kind of feel it paying off, like where it's just like, like I don't have to explain this anymore. Like I don't have to like, it's working. And then like, that is such a ball, like, cause it's like, it's almost like you're pushing this boulder, you're pushing and slowly moving and you can feel it moving. So you keep trying. And then like, once it starts moving, it's just like, it's not any less work. It just feels different. And then you know that it's paying off. And then you know that if you put half of what you did in to get here, it's going to go. And then that's kind of where you start getting the confidence and things start getting a little bit easier. And then like, the name of the podcast is out further. And then like people come on and they respect the interview. And then they're like, oh, you're not just dicking around over here and trying to make money off of something. Like you're doing something. And then like having people understand that idea, like it's a weird feeling. And I'm sure you've went through it where like, that had to have felt so crazy when it was just 2 days and 10 grand. And it's just like, holy shit. Like you get it.
Yeah. It was awesome. I mean, I look back really fondly on that time. Cause that's also the time, like before I had to really do the work too. Like that's the time when the momentum is picking up. We're not in production yet. So it's just
then
like
you hit quicksand.
Yeah. Right. So that was a really exciting time. Yeah. That was like I said, I turned 30 because there was that thing, like you said you started doing this when you were 28 and I had that same thing. I was like 28, 29 and you felt like I'm growing up and I should like, maybe I want to spend my time a different way. And you start to just like take a step back and look at things. And
I don't know if I would have chose to do it earlier because like your 30s are a weird time where like things start to make sense around 35. And then like the business started to make sense the more I did it. But then like hitting my 40s, I feel like that is the most mentally sound you can be, is like 40 to 50. And like, I'm just so grateful that I did, because before I'd be like, man, I started this so late. But then I'm like, no, like the lights turn on at 30. So like, I don't think I would have wanted to do this in my 20s because I would have been too wild or like expected so much more out of this or like wanted money as the goal. Like, you know what I mean? Like I look back on it now and it's like what I got out of it was freedom. And it's like, that's worth way more than money to me all day long. So it's like, in the early days, I think I would have chased the wrong thing where it's like, I'm glad that I spent from 28 to 40 figuring this out. And then I look at like where I'm going to be from 40 to 50. And now I can project things where I'm like, oh, all right, like this, that. And I'm like, I mean, I'm going to be punching out of this way sooner than if I'd be working somewhere waiting to retire.
Yeah.
And I know I'm not going to stop working, but at least it still isn't going to feel like work.
Right. And that's the thing, like, you know, what you said about freedom, the word I always use is control, which is like, it's the same thing. Like if you just decide that you're, you know, it's having your head set right about what the goal is. And I thought at the time in my mid to late 20s, I wasn't making that much money, but I was doing fine. And I was like, if I can do my own thing and even make this much money, like
that was my key too, where I was like,
if you can even match your salary. And I'm like,
I tell people that all the time. They're like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, what do you make now? Okay, well, you think you can make that doing something you like and not make any more than that. And then when you start looking at like, oh, well, that's this a couple $100 a week. And then I'm like, all right, well, could I do that? And then when I started looking at what bills I had to pay down here and wrote it all out and like really like bottom of the barrel, like not even including Netflix, like, you know what I mean? Like how you're going to live. It's not, the number's not crazy to get to. And that's what people start getting tripped up on. And then when I started doing my own thing, a lot of the things that were extras that I was wanting, I don't want anymore. And then even staying down here for as long as I did and like, just not having windows and working and still sacrificing. It's like now I look at like what I want going into the next spot. And I had a conversation with my landlord and he's like, that's what you want? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, well, that stuff like comes with a building. Like,
right.
But like, I'm so not where I was before
you reset the bar, right?
It's really weird. It's like resetting the bar backwards.
Yeah.
Where it's like, you know, I got rid of all my vehicles and got the Ford Transit. But when I got the Ford Transit, I was like, yeah, this is awesome. I can make money out of this. It's like, I probably made more money out of that than what I bought the car for at this point. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, then I can also use it for mountain biking. And now I'm like, oh, like I'm looking at this as a tool and this is no longer a car. And like, what is the real necessity of a car? And then like all of that has been completely rewound and rewired into my brain where it's like, yeah, I don't know. You know, I'm like, well, what do I get after that? Because the car is going to get swallowed into the bagel business. And then I'm like, well, do I need a car or would I just use the bagel business car? And then I'm like, I have my little motorcycle. So I was like, why don't I just do that? And I don't need to have a car. Why do I need to have a car? Why like you're told to do so much stuff, especially back in the era that I grew up. It's like, oh, you got to get married. You got to have kids. You got to go to college. And they kind of set these things up that they tell you need.
Yeah.
And they're not all needs at all. And then when you look at what you really need, you're like, oh, I could totally go bare bones and run a business. And then you're happy and you have freedom. And then I'm like, yeah, I'd rather this than be at a job I hate, driving in a car I love, and absolutely wanting to hang myself every morning going to the same thing on repeat that you hate.
That same
it's dreadful.
That same period of time that I was talking about, that first production summer where I'm figuring out how many hours a day can I work? Like, what's the ceiling on it? I'm also doing the math of like, what's the financial floor? I'm like, what if I buy nothing, if I don't spend any money that I don't have to spend? Because you find like, what's the least I can survive on? Because that's the amount of money I'm going to take until this business can afford to pay me more. You find these, like, there are people that have these startups, and this is one way to do it. They immediately pay themselves that salary that they think they should be getting. And that's just built into the burn rate of the business financials. And they're like, oh, well, I guess we need to go find investors because I'm burning through all the business
and then
capital.
they're getting like millions of dollars of investment and half of it's to pay the people.
And they're giving away half their company for that investment and stuff. And like the goal from the beginning was like, I don't want to have to take on investors. I want to own my own company and I want to figure out how to do this that I don't have to do that. Cause again, it's about, for me, control, and that I want to be able to do this myself and be able to own it myself and all those things. And I figured out what the floor was, and I was paying myself like whatever at the poverty line. I mean, it was very, very little money. I think I paid myself nothing for 6 months until I ate through all my savings. And then for the next year, I paid myself just that scraping by number. And then it was a year and a half in that I was like, okay, I can pay myself a normal amount of money. But it took a while to get, like, you know, for the business to really stand on its own 2 feet and for me to feel like I'm not draining my own business just to put it in my pocket and spend it where, like, what am I going to do with that money? This is just a ridiculous, like, oh, because I want to drive a nicer car or whatever. Like, it's all fine. Like, it's just a ridiculous, that's not the goal. So,
yeah. And I feel like when you like, there's voids, of course, that everyone tries to fill, and there's like things that you try and replace, and it's like when like I replaced that with the business and the work, and like then I realized how much I got back from this. There really wasn't a void anymore, and when that void's, it took a couple months when I started working on my own, but when that was just the answer to the problem, and then like you're not buying stupid shit, and I'm not like doing stuff and like spending money and like doing all this stuff, you just start there's nowhere that you want to dump that to. And that's an odd feeling where like I just don't feel the necessity to like to me, I was like thinking about like, oh, what car will I get next? And I'm drawing a blank. Where before I'd be like, you know what? I had this and I want that feeling again. And now I'm like, I don't know. Like maybe it'd be cool to get like an old Geo tracker. And like, you know what I mean? Like now I'm just thinking about stupid stuff. And then I'm like, what a stupid idea that is to get a Geo tracker. And then I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, you don't care about materialistic things at all.
Yeah.
At all. And then I'm like, oh, where I have to like find myself being like, hey man, like you should probably like spend a little bit more money on like clothing. And like, you know what I mean? Like you're in the work. And like, I just think that's such a beautiful time to be in that, where it's like, you know, I'm really taking in how much I've changed. And then like, even on Easter, I was talking to, my brother's wife's mom, and like I was talking to her, and she knew us because I'm like explaining this. She's like, you don't gotta explain it to me. Like, you know, I was the one who was picking you and Kevin up from getting in trouble. Like, you know what I mean? Like that stuff's kind of long gone, and it's like you don't know what that itch is. And I never knew what the finish line was. And then when, like what you said, I have control, I have freedom. I don't gotta run an idea by somebody, and then they think I'm just trying to take credit for something, and now we're arguing, or there's like some chef in the kitchen who wants it his way, and they're just, you know, I'm just like, yo, like I can just freely paint and do whatever I want. And it's been a very liberating process. And it's one of my favorite things about talking to people with, because nobody points out the amount of hard work it takes to get there. And then nobody talks about like the feeling you have in between there, where it's just like odd to fulfill that. Because it's such a crazy idea in the beginning, and then you sacrifice everything, and you're too far along on the hamster wheel, where it's like you don't really get a lot of time to stop and be like, oh yeah, that was cool, because it's every day. It's like, whoa, here we go with more podcasts, more emails, networking, call this person, book it, we're moving, we're opening around. Like it's just boom. Yeah. I love that though.
And I have to remind myself occasionally how touch and go it is in those first couple of years. Like
it's crazy.
Like up until maybe 2018, I'm like, it could have failed any number of times, any number of ways. And it's so easy now, however many years in, 6, 7 years in, you look back and it feels inevitable, because you're like, oh yeah, I did the work and I did the thing. And I'm like, that's totally not. There's a healthy dose of just luck and chance and whatever. It just, you know, it happened this way, and I've been fortunate. But I'm like, those first couple of years, even though I feel like I really put it all on the line for this, I'm like, it still could have failed. I mean, it almost did a number of times where we got into a tight spot where, whatever, we had some production problems or something, or you know, customers, or you know, for whatever reason. The first couple of years are just dicey until you get that, until the ball is rolling and you have that stable baseline. And it probably wasn't until like 2018, probably, I think like year 3, that I started to feel like,
we got this.
Yeah.
Yeah. That
like a problem would come up and I'm like, we're going to figure this out. Cause I'm like, well, I know that we figured out all that other shit the first couple of years.
Yeah.
This is solvable, and we've already been through the worst. And just to like be able to just take a deep breath and be like, oh, we're good.
Yeah. It's just putting the work in, and being able to kind of like delegate where you want to put the hard work and all that. I want to transition a little bit, because I like the whole Stargazer concept and how you went over that. So like when this was all developing, you obviously have to build a brand behind it. You obviously have to build something that's marketable, and it's like the product will speak for itself. But you guys did some cool things with the design, and even like the UFO stuff that you did with the t-shirt. Like there's some really cool stuff in there that makes the social media special as well. But like, where did the whole Stargazer Stargazer thing came from? Are you into astrology? Like, where did that whole concept of like using that vibe start from? Was that something in the beginning? Did it develop after? Or is it something that you kind of were going to throw in with it? But like, that was really interesting to me how you branded it. Because even the packaging, and you guys hit a home run on all that stuff.
Thanks very much. Yeah, it was definitely from the beginning. I mean, as soon as I started to see that it was possible, like, you know, in that phase where you're like, I started to have designs that I'm confident in, and there were some people telling me, hey, this is actually possible to make this thing and all that. I started throwing names around, and I thought, you know, you always want it to be personal because it's my thing. It's my baby. So I love the ocean and I love space, and there was a lot of ocean names and space names and like space travel and stuff like that. And through the process of throwing the names around, you're also thinking about what's the cleanest, simplest logo. Like for me, and just the way that I design and the way that just my design style is like, what's the simplest version of this thing? Like what's the cleanest way to present it, that it's understandable and also just no frills branding. And I kept coming back to something with star in the name, because I'm like, if you can have a star is like one of the simplest symbols. And if you're going to be stamping in an iron and you print it on the packaging, and you can kind of put it anywhere at any size, and a star will make sense and translate, and you'll know what the star is. And so I wanted to have star in the name. And we got to Stargazer, which a lot of people, they see that and they think it's like an outdoorsy thing. It's like, oh, because you're like cooking with cast iron over the campfire and you're looking up at the stars or something. And I definitely didn't think through all those steps. It was more.
But it plays out that way perfectly.
Yeah. And we've gone in and out of using it, like how directly we tie it to the branding. Like you mentioned that UFO t-shirt that we have, and we've had different versions of the website that have, some of them have like constellations on it and stuff like that. And I think it's fun to play with that. It doesn't really have anything to do with cast iron directly. It's just something that felt personal, and that I liked the way the logo looked. And I thought, that it translated, and it felt right. It also felt just like ambiguous enough that the timing of it, like there were some other cast iron brands that were calling it these like old timey names that they were trying to make it sound vintage. And I'm like, I didn't like that. I wanted it to be just sort of neutral. And
I like that you hit that nerve, because when you were going over it, you know, the first thing with cast iron, people probably think like cowboys and wagon wheels and like you're out on the range and having supper, and like, I like that you guys aren't in that lane at all, and it's like Stargazer, and like immediately when I first start, you're like, oh, cool, and then, you know, the packaging, you're like, oh, constellations and all that, and then it does correlate to cooking it outside over a campfire, so it's like you almost like open the door, and it kind of speaks in like 3 different ways, but then it also puts you guys in a total lane outside of like the cowboy stuff, which you still could cross over, but like you don't have to at all. And you're kind of making your own thing. And it's really unique the way that came out of like, well, I mean, it's not crazy, because everything you've done is you put yourself into this. So then if the name falls into it too, and you want to do this the way you want to do it, it's cutting your lane out completely. You're not copying and staying over here and like the Western stuff. It's like you're in your own lane. And like that was probably what stood out the most before even seeing the product. Is like, oh, that's a dope name. Like, oh, that's cool. Then it's like, oh, there's a print on it. And like, because the bottom of it, correct, is where you stamp it.
Yeah,
it's
well, we got
camera here. You can hold it up to.
We've got a little star up on the helper handle there, and then on the bottom we've got the big star right in the middle, and Stargazer along the top. I'm not sure how well that's.
No, it's perfect, and I will use that as a thumbnail.
There you go.
No, I mean, I just think it's really cool. So like, how long did it take for you to kind of come up with that stamp? I mean, you kept it pretty simple. I mean, was it just kind of the one thing that you did from the beginning and then just kind of tweaks on it? Yeah,
I played with a couple different stars, and we decided on the 8-pointed star, because to me that's a star that makes you that's a star as in stars in the sky. I don't know how to explain that. Like if you have a 5-pointed star, to me it immediately looks like the American flag star, and it doesn't read as stars in the sky. And obviously 6-pointed star is Star of David, and then the 8-pointed star just looked like
a star.
Yeah, star. There you go.
Yeah. No, that's cool. I dig the whole concept of it completely.
Thanks.
How did you get into the packaging? Because that's such a unique thing that like even like putting the pan in the box to ship, because shipping had to be its own nightmare of a process to get through. But like,
Yeah.
how did you do the packaging for all that? Did you just have to talk to, finding a manufacturer and then just kind of having hey, do you ship cast iron? And then it's just kind of a thing that they do already?
That was much more trial and error. Like there are certain things. So like the way to cast a shape, that's a very well established thing. And if you talk to enough foundries, you can learn enough about casting to figure that out. Stuff like how to do the packaging, how to do this specific surface finish, which we should talk about at some point. All of those took a couple years of us doing it and just making it up as we went along. Like there wasn't like a cast iron shipping expert that I could talk to.
It's just kind of like research and development at that point, because you're just doing it over and over.
And we had I think we're maybe on like version 4 of the box. And we found out pretty quickly the first version of the box, half the time that it gets delivered, the skillet's like poking out the side of the box. And it's just like, to have it be.
And that's stuff that you don't know until you get into the process of doing it.
And you just count on the feedback, and same with the surface finish. Like I had, my idea of what the perfect surface finish was, but then as you're in production and as people are cooking on it and I'm cooking on it, and you start to like just refine it. And that's something that evolves more over time.
To get the best version of what you're trying to do.
Yeah, exactly. And it probably took 3 years for us to really dial in both of those things, to have the packaging where it should be, and probably most importantly, that the surface finish is performing the way that I think it's supposed to perform, and that it's non-stick, but it's holding the seasoning and it's doing, it's...
Yeah, how do you even get into figuring that out and just dialing it in like that?
Well, at the time, so I'll backtrack a little bit and say that the skillet, the way that we make it is that it's machined after casting, and machining is a catch-all term for when you're cutting away material. So they cast it thicker, and then it's going through a whole separate machining operation where they're cutting away the surface inside the cooking surface, and for us all the way up the wall and to the rim as well. And that first, wave of that first production run, we went with the prevailing wisdom at the time, which was that the smoother the better. And there were people that were excited about mirror polished cast iron, and there's a lot of talk about polished, and that's not good at all. But we had to figure that out. Like we were giving people what I thought was best and what people wanted, which is shiny, and it was machined dead smooth and had that it almost looked like stainless steel finish. And then we'd throw the seasoning on it, and the food doesn't stick to it, but the seasoning kind of flakes away, and it doesn't hold seasoning that well either. And it took us, like I said, a couple years of trial and error of you want to rough it up. You have to introduce some texture, but also keep it smooth. And we're really dialing in. The way that I explain it is we're getting closer and closer to the Goldilocks zone, where it starts off very rough because it's cast in sand, and then you machine it totally flat and smooth, and then we're grinding on it, and then we're doing 2 other surface finish steps to get it. One of them roughs it up a little bit, and then the other one smooths it out a little bit. And after those 5 stages, you end up with something that has a little bit of texture, but it's still more or less smooth, and whatever we call it, micro textured is the marketing on it. But it's what gives it that color, and that it's sort of semi-gloss, and it does a good job of holding the seasoning and a good job of releasing the food. And it just took, like I said, it just took a couple years to
it was impressive to see what they were actually going through when I took the tour, and then seeing where the guys were getting it and rounding out specific parts, and then it was going into a tumbler, and it was just holy shit, anyone I talked to on that ride home, they're because sometimes people just call me what were you doing? And I was well, I was over at Stargazer. And then I'm just you have such flourished information coming everywhere, where it's it was very impressive to see how far it's gone from you saying it was a shed to coming up with the finish and then like using, people's feedback on it to make a better product and not just being like, no,
Right.
I was right. Like you're just constantly dialing it in. And then like, and just even from this conversation, and a lot of times when people come on here is like nothing is ever good enough for the person because it's your baby and you want it to always be. And when you have those people line everything up correctly, you really get a fantastic product with an obsession with it wanting to be the best. And to the person, it never is going to be the best. And it's just a carrot in front of you to make yourself a better and better and better product. If you want to hold that up and kind of go over like the design of it, because it was interesting how you guys went through the handles and everything. And like, do you want to kind of just walk us through with like the development of how it came to the way it is now?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing we looked at was surface finish. That was like part of the surface finish is totally the gateway drug here, because you look at the vintage stuff. The reason people are so excited about the vintage stuff is because they used to machine it and grind it smooth. And there was a lot of handwork put into smoothing them out that through the 60s, 70s, 80s, that sort of lull in cast iron history, a lot of costs were cut and things were done to like, just lower the cost and whatever else. They got not as much labor was put into them through that time. And this surface finish was the thing that I was originally excited about. I don't know how well it picks up on camera, but you can see it's kind of shiny, as opposed to the bottom, which is more of a as cast finish. It still has the sand graininess to it. So we did looking at the surface finish first and figuring out how do you machine this and the geometry of the pan, and how do you get in there with a cutting head, and are you milling it, are you turning it, and figuring that out. So that was a lot of it. And the handle stuff, a lot of it was just practical. Like there was some cast iron in the market that has this really small sort of tab on the other end. And I'm like, cast iron's heavy. And if I can only get one finger under the handle here, it's worthless. So I'm like, I wanted a full, what I call four finger handle. I can actually get a good grip on it. And then the forked handle on the other side is for heat dissipation. So I didn't invent this. I just hadn't seen it in cast iron yet. There were some other types of cookware that use a forked handle because you're increasing the surface area and you're letting the heat vent out. It's like, like fins on an engine that dissipate the heat. It's venting out some of that heat that it's not transferring it up the handle. So it works incredibly well for such a simple, like it's so basic, but the handle will get warm, but it's like, I've never burned my hand on a, you know what I mean? Like other cast iron with the short stubby handle, you got to use a mitt or something, or it'll get pretty hot pretty fast. And then all the curves, a lot of that is about how do you get the most comfortable handle and get it the most like usable without adding any additional weight, because the cast iron's already so heavy that you're trying to kind of shave away material strategically. And that's where the scoop came from. So I don't know if it's going to pick up on camera, but the handle has kind of this sort of hollowed out center to it. And that was all about, you want something big enough to fill your hand and to get a good grip on, and to be long enough to get a good grip on, and while reducing the weight as much as possible. Because if this were a solid slab of iron there, I'd be adding another half pound or something.
I was going to say,
it's like
be quite a
significant.
bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So even as it is now, most of the weight is in the just central, whatever, the functional part of the skillet. And you're trying to add as little weight as possible with the handles. I think we're adding, on our 10.5-inch skillet, it's about 0.4 pounds for the helper handle and 0.8 pounds for the long handle. And even that, like there are some companies out there making a lighter skillet because they have I can see that they've like put the tiny handles on there. And I'm like, you're playing the game. Like everything in industrial design like this is a compromise, because you want the handle as usable as possible. And that makes it, if that makes it bigger, okay, that's going to make it a little heavier. And it's like I talked about with the surface finish, that you're finding that Goldilocks zone where it's not just about as smooth as possible or as light as possible. The marketing around this stuff a lot of times looks like that you're like, oh, we have the lightest or the whatever. I'm like, yeah, but that's not the thing. Like if I make this as light as possible, I can machine this to twice as thin as this. I can go super thin. That's not going to cook as well. And it's not going to be as durable too. It's going to warp, and it's not going to hold up over time. So this is the right balance between the weight and the functionality of the pan and the longevity of the pan and all these things. So you're doing the best you can to make it as usable as possible and introduce some of these features while keeping it still cooking like a cast iron skillet is supposed to cook, which a lot of that is just about heat retention, which means that the mass is functional. I mean, the more mass you have, the more iron that's there, the more it's going to retain the heat. And there, it's a balancing act between retaining heat and having control over the heat. Because if it's really light, well, then when I crank up the heat or lower the heat while I'm cooking, it's going to respond very quickly. But that's actually not what I want out of cast iron. I want it to hold the heat so that I can warm up this pan. And when I dump a bunch of ingredients into it, I don't want the temperature of the pan to drop. I want it to maintain its heat. So you're finding what's the right thickness, what's the right amount of mass that lets it hold the heat while still being manageable and, light enough that I can move it around, and while still being controllable. Like if it's twice this thick, it's going to hold the heat forever. And if I've got it, if my burner's set too hot and the food is scorching and I back off the burner, nothing's going to happen for a while because you've still got all that iron there holding all that heat. It's like you turn the oven off, it's not cold. You get, it's still holding the oven's insulated. It's still holding the heat. It's the same idea. So that's that dialing in that thickness thing. And that's a lot of what the Stargazer thing is. And if you're going to pay for a premium product like this, you're paying for the precision of that machining, and that those additional machining steps are getting the surface finish, and they're getting a really precise weight and material thickness that you can just dial in so much more precisely than you can with casting. I mean, you can imagine you're pouring iron into sand. It's like, that's only so precise. You're CNC machining these, and it's like they can dial it into within the thickness of a hair.
Yeah.
I mean, literally a hair. Like,
that's crazy.
Yeah.
Hearing the amount of information and how you can dial that in, and like what people use to sell a product by weight, when you actually get into what it is, then it has nothing to do with that at all.
Yeah. And that's that consumer education thing. So with cast iron, you're both, for younger people, maybe they didn't grow up with cast iron, and you've got to kind of introduce them to the idea of cast iron. And then from there, there's some education about, do you want a light one? Do you want a heavy one? And what are the different surface finishes, and who cares? And you're always kind of like, you're trying to deliver the messaging as clearly as possible. And
yeah.
Marketing is definitely not my thing, but we've figured it out we seem to have, we seem to have gotten there where people are understanding what we're trying to do. And we have, and a lot of it too is just building a customer base that understands what you're doing, and they're happy with the product, and they've told people about it. And, it's just that getting momentum thing.
What products do you have available now? Because I know you have two sizes, and I kind of want to get into, we'll start wrapping up, but
Sure.
I want to get into the sizes you have now, and then like projects that you have for, I don't know how much you want to get into it, or if you put out there on the one that you were showing me on the bigger one.
Yeah,
but
we can talk about that.
So I kind of want to get into what's available now, what you really want to get into down the road, and kind of what's in store for the future of Stargazer.
Sure. Yeah, so we have a 10.5 inch and 12 inch skillet available now. And those are that's like a medium and a large size skillet, which seem to be the main ones for most people. You would think that a smaller skillet would be next, but unbelievable to me anyway, we constantly get requests for something bigger, that like the 12 inch isn't cutting it for people, I think particularly with outdoors cooking. So
yeah, because I was going to say even just thinking when you try, if you're going to get into cast iron, and what a lot of what I see on social media is like people going into like a meal, or like even like making the pizza. It's like a smaller one. It's like, yeah, that's cool. But like at the same time, you see people doing like whole breakfasts inside the thing. So it would make sense that they want to go bigger, not smaller, because there isn't really too much to do with a smaller one.
Mm-hmm. And we get a fair number of people that are doing, they're putting it on the grill or open fire or whatever they're doing.
That's what I plan on doing. I want to, even the guys this weekend, depending on the weather, I talked to them, and like, they were like, yeah, we should do like an open fire thing. And like that's what's exciting to me. I was talking to my dad about it, and we're going to like take rocks and like build our thing. And like, that seems to be really like what I see flying on like food things that I follow. Cause like then I start getting into cast iron accounts, and then like these guys out in the wilderness, like you can do a lot of really cool stuff with them.
Yeah. And we get some like beautiful content from some of the people
It's cool.
cooking with it that
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
like
yeah.
whatever in the woods in the Pacific Northwest
Yep.
or something. It's just gorgeous. But I'll say so in development we have the bigger one is 13.5 inches. And we're not making it a skillet because the handle with the long handle
I
like
like
this,
that though.
it just gets like
Yeah.
crazy. So we put the 2 short handles
Yep.
on it and we're calling it a brazier, which is basically a short Dutch oven. And then we're working on the lids. We get people all the time. Be like,
Oh
when
yeah,
are
I
you
forgot
gonna get
about
the
lids.
So
Yeah.
I'm working on the lids across all the sizes, and I hope like
Did the old Dutch oven or the old cast iron back in the day, did those have lids as well? I'm trying to remember because I remember the pots and pans, but I don't remember if they had lids on them.
they did on the Dutch ovens.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
rarely see them with the skillets. In fact, a lot of times they have the. I've seen some versions of the lids will have the pour spouts, the old style pour spouts,
Oh, yeah,
like
yeah,
in the
yeah.
lid as well.
Yeah.
And then some places will do a like reversible, like it's like a lid or a griddle kind of convertible kind of thing like that. But yeah, we get a lot of people are like, when are we going to get the lid? And eventually,
What's your development ideas for that? How do you see this lid working with it? Are you in the lab kind of working on that as like a side project or?
No, we're actually pretty far along on the lid. So with the brazier is going to be the next product, and we've
Yep.
already built the tooling on that.
Yeah, it's cool. I saw the one at the shop. Like,
Yeah,
I'm
you saw
excited
some-
for that one. That one's really cool.
Right. Yeah. We've done like a few small sample batches kind of thing, and we're just doing the fine tuning before we go, big full volume with it. And we let people, we've been accepting pre-orders for that we got a waiting list on those already.
That's cool.
And
And there's
then-
like that much interest where people are like, yeah, I'll put it in.
Yeah.
Because then when it comes, they get it early.
Yeah. Right. And we get those like the early adopters, our followers who are already
Yep.
invested in the brand. They want it as soon as it comes out. And God bless those people.
Yeah, it's a cool feeling to have that behind you. It's kind of what keeps things going.
Yeah. And then the lids, the design work is done. And we've already done all the 3D printing and trying different size knobs and all that
I forgot
kind of
about
stuff.
the 3D printing, so
Yeah.
you've probably been able to do that and then kind of just see what'll fit and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. So for like, probably 3-4 months, something like that, we were trying all different shapes and sizes of knobs and different shapes of dome shapes and different fits and how tall do we want it and all that kind of thing. And all that's sorted out. So we're moving ahead with building the tooling.
Who do
on
you
that.
run all that by? The workers in the office or workers in the back, or is it just kind of something you work out with people that you run ideas by?
It's mostly just me until I feel like I'm pretty confident. And then I'll invite other people in basically to poke holes in it, which is just like
Yeah.
a fun, like I'll 3D print 3 different versions and I know which one I think is best. And I'll just have them out on the lunch table. And like, as the guys are coming in, I'm like, pick these up and you tell me what feels right. And it's always like, I like getting the opinions, but no one ever agrees on the,
No.
you have like, yeah, half of them are like, oh, it's definitely this one. And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, it's not. It's the other, whatever. Occasionally though, I do get like rattled off. Like I think I'm confident going into it and then I'll invite other people and they're like, oh no, why are you doing it that way? It's this way. And then I'll have to go back and rethink it. And it's always helpful to get other people because sometimes you're working on a project so long for months, you get this just like tunnel vision on it and you forget.
Yep.
And then someone comes in and points out something obvious that they're like, why isn't the knob smaller? And you're like, oh yeah, why did I make the knob that big in the first place?
It's crazy when you go down. We were just working on a project with a video, and I don't even remember what the original idea was. And then like that's where you learn a lot too. Where like I went back to Matt and I was like, next time let's just pay an editor because we don't have the time to do this. And then
Yeah.
but then you start learning like, because if you do let the project go too far, it's like it was at a point where I was like, oh, all right, this is what we wanted, and now it's like when like people will be like, hey, can I see that? And like, I don't even want an opinion on it because I don't remember what the idea was. And then I'm like, cool, this is overthought out. It's going to work. We definitely need to tighten this up on the next one. But it's like, that's another thing that like, I don't know, like when you hit stuff like that, I don't get stressed on it anymore. Where before that would have been like the end of I would have been so devastated that like,
Yeah.
oh my God, this project, where like now it's like you learn to pull emotions out of it. And you're like, cool, this is overproduced. This is going to be good. It's going to work. Let's use it. And then next time, let's just dial this in a little bit tighter. And then when you start coming out with new products and new things, the turnaround and everything's just faster.
Yeah. That's like the worst part. I mean, that's kind of the nightmare scenario of any creative process is you get to that last 1%,
Yep.
that last stage, and you're like, why are we even doing this?
Yep.
Like, what was this supposed to be? And we've all
You're
had a
making
few
a
of those.
lid.
Yeah, exactly. And then someone comes in, you're like, what are we even doing? You have that, just total existential, like just meltdown around it.
Yeah.
But a lot of times the right answer, it's just because you have tunnel vision on the thing and you're
Yeah.
like, you lose your perspective on it.
Yep.
And you got to just be like, all right, let's just put it out there. And we know we've done our homework on this, and we know, you just.
But that's
gotta,
fun then too, trusting the idea. And
you got it right, exactly.
You know how much work you put in. We're like, look, there's like the thing that we're working on. It's like I'm still just trying to wrap up some loose ends on it, and I've been trying to get it out this year. And it's like I wanted to do it this month, and it didn't, and it's probably going to project in the next month. But it's like even then, I'm at the point where like I would be like, this was supposed to be done last year, and now it's just like, cool, man, like let's. Like, why skip the steps of, because it's like I'm working on some things and it's still dragging, and it's like, cool, it's dragging.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to just rip this out of the water and be like, here it is.
Yeah.
It's like, no, just wait. If it's another month, it's another month at this point. We're a year behind.
Right.
So it's like, what's the difference of a year and 2 months and do it correctly and learn from it than just keep, rushing.
And that's one of those things that sometimes you have to be reminded of too, where I'm like, someone around you will be like, you don't have to, like, you don't have to do this now. Yeah, you need that reality check of like, oh, okay, so whatever. Whenever we get it done, we get it done.
Yeah, and then you forget that you are in charge. And I'm like, I don't. What if I'll just I'll release it next year.
Yeah,
like,
and sometimes I need to be reminded of that too. I'm like, sometimes I feel like, I got to get to the office. I'm like, no, I don't. Like, who's going to make me do that?
Yeah.
I want to work from home today. I'm going to work from home today.
Yeah, that's the stuff I like with the freedom of it, because it's like if I'm having an off day, it's like, now it's like I can pull an interview because I know it's not going to be what I wanted it to be. And then like I know that I shouldn't interview somebody if I'm not in the right headspace, or if like I need an extra day because I worked all weekend. Like that's what I did this week. Like Monday dragged because I had Easter and I didn't get that day to like recharge and just kind of just sit and not talk to anyone.
Yeah.
And then a friend of mine's like, hey, you should come out here. And I was like, I'll go out there. I can get content. It's still stuff for social media. And then like on the ride home last night, it was late, but I was like, man, I needed that to function and get through the rest of this week. And then like, but that's what I like, is because I didn't get that at other jobs. I had to go in and, oh, hey, what's wrong with you today? You all right? And it's just like, no, I'm not all right. But now I can like freely go dump out and then be like, I need this to be like working the way it does. I don't need it overshot.
Yeah.
So then you start like learning like where not to burn out, where to turn. And then like when it's yours, you have the freedom of doing that. And I think that's what is the biggest payoff at all, is to be able to control that and then be able to be like, like what you said, I'll just work from home today.
And it takes time too to have that awareness. Like I feel like only in the last couple years have I realized that I'm like, on the days when I'm feeling energetic, it's like, great, power through,
crush stuff.
Yeah. And on the days when I'm kind of lethargic, I'm like, I don't have to white knuckle it and muscle through stuff. It's like,
because when you white knuckle it, you're doing 10 times the work of a normal person.
Yeah.
So it's like even today, the amount of stuff I got done is what a normal person would have gotten done Monday and Tuesday. But I just rammed it into the first hour. And then it's like I cleaned this whole place up, got ready, made a bunch of calls, sent a bunch of emails out. And I'm like, okay, we're back on track. And like, that's a new thing that I'm learning, is like, dude, it's okay to like wander off and then get back on track, because you always get back on track. You always get back on track fast. And when you get back on track, you do way more work than you would have on Monday and Tuesday dragging your ass. And like, that's where like the confidence of like turning it into the business owner that I want to be, the business owner, that like it was worth all the bullshit up until now is worth being able to dial in like where I want to be.
For sure.
I want to wrap up and like just kind of like give you an opportunity to kind of like go over where anyone can get a hold of Stargazer. Anybody can kind of see the information on it. I mean, this is a ton of information. I learned so much. This was a really awesome podcast. I always like connecting with people that kind of put everything on the line. They get crazy. They go down the rabbit hole. There's a lot of stuff that crossed over between both of us, but then the knowledge of just like what you put into that is super beneficial to actually explain calling it a premium product and then realizing the amount that goes into making it that, and you're not just labeling it that. But I want to thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
There's plenty of projects that I want to get into with you down the road, especially with like having the cooking studio, and we can do a bunch of stuff with that and showcase new products when you get them. I want to give you an opportunity to kind of give your social media out, because the social media is awesome to follow. It's constantly people reposting their cooking, and if you're into cooking and you're into any kind of thing like that, you can get a lot of different ideas. And like I saw pizza in it the other day, and then I was like, I could be making pizzas with local stone in this thing. But I just want to give you a chance to kind of plug all that into the website and how they can purchase this stuff, whether there's a waiting line or limit around anything. But I just kind of want to give you the floor to do that.
Yeah, it's just stargazercastiron.com, and that's where everything is. So it's direct to consumer. You place your order on the website, and we ship it from Allentown, or you can come to Allentown and pick it up if you want. But that's where we do all the orders, and then on social, our handle is Stargazer Cast Iron at Stargazer Cast Iron. We're mostly on Instagram. That's our like kind of main platform, but we're also on Facebook. Not as much the others. I think we maybe dabble with TikTok, but it's Stargazer Cast Iron is always the handle, and we're in Allentown. And what else can I tell you? That's about it.
Cool.
Any like wait times or sort of logistical stuff like that is going to be on the website with the most up to date information about production timing and whatever else.
Cool. I appreciate you coming on. If everyone, or if you're a first-time listener, first-time watcher, it is neveragainstudio.com. That's where we have all of our podcasts. You can find us on Spotify and iTunes. Those are the big ones that you can find the stuff on. But if you go to the website, you can listen to the audio or watch the video there. If you go over to the YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube. We're halfway there to being monetized. That's a huge help. And what's coming down with the new studio is a lot more content. So it's not just going to be podcasts that you're going to have on the channel. There's going to be cooking shows and a bunch of other stuff. Patreon, all that kind of stuff's coming. And I want to just thank you for tuning in, and all of our apparel's on there as well. So for right now, it's going to be over at neveragainstudio.com. And then Kyle from Dynamite Screen Printing is our new sponsor. So he's going to be doing all of our apparel, and it's going to be drop shipping, but we're going to have way more that we can offer. We're going to go back into the old t-shirts, and I can pretty much any t-shirt I've ever done is going to be up for sale, and that's going to be coming down. By the time this is out, that'll be up and running. So you can check that out, and all the links for Stargazer is going to be in the below information. So thank you again, man.
Thank you.
This was cool.
Good to be here.
Never Again Radio. Get into it, brother.